Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. During the month of July, tensions rose to an all-time high, with the Islamist Hamas organization firing more than 250 rockets and mortar shells toward Israel's southern communities, while the Israeli military targeted, among others, militant installations across the Islamist-run Gaza Strip. To further discuss the latest developments on the Gaza front, I'm joined here in the studio by Professor Efraim Inbar, who is the president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic Studies. Welcome. I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir, Oren, and Lieutenant Colonel in Reserve, Reuven Ben Shalom, who is a cross-cultural strategist and columnist at the Jerusalem Post. Welcome. Mr. Oren, give us a broader understanding on the latest developments with regard to the Gaza Strip.
On the Israeli Hamas front, there are permanent problems and temporary troubles. The permanent problem is the fact that Hamas does not recognize Israel, does not recognize the Oslo agreements which created the Palestinian Authority and, of course, gave rise to the agreement, the temporary agreement, interim agreement between Israel and the PA. And Hamas has been ruling Gaza through elections for 12 years and through military force for 11, and has been involved in at least three medium or big campaigns against Israel during this time. The situation from a humanitarian point of view is dire, and there is no end in sight. This is the permanent position. The temporary trouble started when Hamas in late March organized marches towards the fence between Israel and Gaza in order to demonstrate the Palestinian claim that they have the right of return to pre-1967 Israel. There were clashes between the Israeli troops and the demonstrators, which included also demolition charges thrown at the Israeli troops and other attacks on the Israelis. There were, as you mentioned, rockets and casualties, and there are incendiary kites and balloons which are burning Israeli fields, and all of these gave rise to an escalation. Now, whether this escalation will stop on the threshold before the next campaign or not remains to be seen, and the current month of August would be a good litmus test.
Professor Inbar, when I talked with a member of Hamas in Gaza, I asked him, why do they fire rockets towards civilians? And he came back with one of their usual answers, but among others, he focused on the matter of saying that every time they fire rockets and incendiary kites, this is the only time the international community actually reacts and actually looks towards the Gaza Strip. And when they don't, everybody focuses on Syria and elsewhere and forget about their problems and about what they perceive as an unjustified blockade and so on and so forth. To what degree can Israel actually deal with the permanent problem that Mr. Oren has cited, as well as the ongoing tensions and challenges that Israel is facing?
I think Israel should realize that it has a permanent problem, that we have to learn to live with it. There is no solution in sight. And as a result of that, our responses should be wise in order to prevent unnecessary escalation, to prevent unnecessary pain on the other side. And sometimes we have to be patient to see how it goes. Maybe it will end before an escalation. We should be aware that Hamas is playing with brinkmanship. They try to find the type of pain they'll exact of Israel without having to suffer a great response from Israel. This is a game they are playing. And of course, Israel, particularly when it has a problem in the north, has to learn to live with this situation and to try to establish, if possible, temporary deterrence.
Colonel Ben Shalom.
The situation in Gaza is crazy. Of course, as Israelis, we will always say the terror organization Hamas, probably one of the only Israelis that when they attack the IDF, I don't call them terrorists, but that's not the case. I don't think their main criminality is towards Israelis. We've been doing well so far as maintaining the situation. We have very good protective systems. We're certainly ending the issue of the tunnels with the underground obstacle that we're putting there. Someday we'll find a solution for the fire kites, although until now they're bringing us down to our knees. The big criminality is towards the Palestinian people, because what they're doing now is they're leading to a humanitarian crisis. The Gaza Strip is in a terrible situation, hardly any drinking water. And this place, by the way, is sustained by us. So Israel fuels them literally with gas and fuel and aggregates and everything necessary to sustain this place. The international community through the UN, through UNRWA, gives them this platform. So we're all supplying a platform for a terror organization to sustain this fight. They don't care about the Palestinian people. They don't care about stability. They don't want to solve anything. They want to continue carrying the flag of resistance against the occupation. And so far, we're all playing along.
Mr. Oren, when we're talking about the Gaza Strip, obviously we're talking about the Islamist Hamas organization, which controls this Palestinian enclave. Nevertheless, they're part of a bigger people, if you will. The West Bank, you have the Palestinians there, you have Palestinians all over the Middle East and all over the world to that matter. But the organizations within the Palestinian society have an ongoing dispute, a blood feud between families, and it's not one people de facto. It's different families, it's different tribes, if you will, that made up the Palestinian people together. To what degree can the Palestinian groups come to some kind of an understanding with regard to the Gaza Strip, considering the fact that there is an ongoing feud that has crippled not only the ongoing processes that have been trying to establish a sustainable solution between Israel and the Palestinians, but a reality that could bring about a sustainable solution to the Palestinians within themselves?
The intra-Palestinian conflicts seem to be as bitter, if not more bitter, than their conflict with Israel. In the Gaza Strip, as you mentioned, there were indigenous people who lived there before 1948, and you have the refugees which came over during the war of 1948, so you have tensions between those. Some or many of the refugees still live in refugee camps or neighborhoods, and they get some sort of assistance by UNRWA, while others do not. So this is one sort of thing. In the West Bank, you have those who suffered, according to their narrative, from the occupation, while you have people who came with Yasser Arafat from Tunis who did not suffer. Here, again, tension. You have some tension between those who live in Hebron and those who live in Ramallah and those who live in Nablus. And you have tension between the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority and Gaza under Hamas. The problem for Israel is that while in the West Bank it has good security cooperation with the various security organizations which have been trained by the United States, and many terror plots are foiled, what you see is not what you get. There were and still are many cases in which Israel, with some cooperation by the Palestinians, managed to foil terror acts driven by Hamas, but out of the West Bank. Hamas doesn't want, as was mentioned here through its brinkmanship, Hamas doesn't want to get involved in a real war with Israel, so it tries to do it out of the West Bank. The word deterrence was mentioned here earlier. Israeli defense doctrine always relied on the other side being afraid that if Israel doesn't see any other resort, it will attack and occupy its capital and subjugate its people. It doesn't work with Gaza. Israel doesn't want to take this burden upon itself. There's no end for that, and therefore Hamas can provoke Israel to a certain degree. So in some cases, there is a common interest for both sides to exchange blows without getting into a full war. Israel also doesn't want to kill, to assassinate the current leadership of Hamas because it is mildly reasonable. It wants to preserve Yahya Sinwar and others as partners, especially since Egypt and the UN envoy Nikolai Mladenov can negotiate between them some sort of ceasefire. So the fighting goes on, and little by little it accumulates. And a few weeks ago, the first Israeli casualty, first Israeli soldier killed in the last 4 years was hit by a sniper from Gaza. So when we mention that, we also have to remember that for 4 years, there was no Israeli killed in action in Gaza.
Professor Inbar, while you spoke about no solution in the viable future, we have, of course, Egypt, which has been trying to somehow, with the help, obviously, of Middle East envoy of the United Nations, Nikolai Mladenov, and others, to bring about some kind of ceasefire between Israel and the Islamist Hamas organization and its different allies, which have also Iranian proxies in there that are supporting it. To what degree is the statement that we heard last week by Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who addressed in a conference in Cairo the Israeli people and said that this now is a critical opportunity in order to bring about some kind of process that may lead to a future solution? Is that just cynical or some kind of populist statement, or is there something behind the scenes that is happening that we're not aware about?
Yeah, I doubt very much if there is now a chance for a more comprehensive agreement between the Israelis and Palestinians. Basically, we have to understand that the Egyptians see Hamas more or less as an enemy. They are an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they understand that they are a problem for the Egyptian regime. They suspect that Hamas is helping the radical Islamist elements in Sinai, and they don't want to take over Gaza just like the Israelis. So they live with a problem and they try to contain the damage as much as possible. Of course, they have an interest in bringing the Palestinian Authority into Gaza. This is, of course, something that Hamas doesn't want to go along. And I'm not sure the Israelis want Palestinian Authority in Gaza, because after all, the Hamas presence there weakens the Palestinian Authority and makes Palestinians less powerful enemy against Israel. So in this respect, we do not share interests with the Egyptians. But even if the PA will eventually brought by some bayonets, definitely not Israeli bayonets, into Gaza, the gap between the Palestinian position, the Israeli positions are unbridgeable. I think everybody is waiting for a plan from Trump, President Trump, and I think most Israelis are not very optimistic that even a very pro-Israeli plan will be enough, to bring a serious progress in the talks between Israelis and Palestinians.
Colonel Ben Shalom, to what degree do you see the ongoing tensions between Israel and Hamas and various challenges resolved to a certain degree instead of maintained as long as there is an ongoing feud between the different Palestinian factions themselves?
I don't think there's any reason we're ever going to solve it with them. Again, they have an agenda, which is long-term agenda, to annihilate us and establish a Muslim entity here. When we get inside their head this way, we understand very well why they're doing what they're doing, why they can never, ever even be perceived as accepting our existence here, so they can't sign a peace deal with us at all. The maximum they can do is explain inward that they can go to some kind of hudna, some kind of temporary period of calm with us, or ceasefire, in order to achieve the long goal of annihilating us. Now, I think the problem with this is that as an Israeli, everything I will say now will be perceived as Israeli propaganda. Who's going to believe that I'm sitting here really caring about my Gazan neighbors, my Gazan friends? Hard to believe, isn't it? But that's the deadlock. That's the problem. Because forget Israel. Theoretically, we could maintain this situation. We could go on forever and forever. By the way, the West Bank, I think we could go on another 50 years with this deadlock, and someday someone will invent a political mechanism. Gaza, I think, is going to explode in our faces, and it's going to happen very fast. I think it could happen tomorrow morning or next year, but it's going to be devastating. We're talking about thousands and thousands of dead Gazans, our neighbors. The world is going to be shocked at what is going to happen. All this Hamas is leading to right now, as we speak. I think even things that we tell ourselves, like, oh, we're never going to conquer Gaza. We can't go back to that anymore. I disagree. I think everything is possible because when this explodes, and if the Gazans, God forbid, succeed in one of these plans, just like they plan to breach the border and storm into Israeli villages, when something like that will happen, or if a rocket hits a kindergarten, and we could escalate very fast to going into Gaza, taking over Gaza, toppling the regime, decapitating their leaders, and who knows where it's going to go from there. I don't want it, but they are leading to it.
Mr. Oren?
There are domestic tensions in Israel about what is happening on the Gaza border. The Israeli Defense Forces, which is probably the most moderate and considerate element within the Israeli leadership, doesn't see it the same way the media and some politicians do. The Israeli General Staff wonders why certain incidents which killed nobody get such coverage, get such play on the evening news and in newspaper headlines, when, relatively speaking, the situation there has not worsened. But within the Netanyahu government, there are voices calling for a campaign against Hamas, even though it will entail going into Gaza and suffering Israeli casualties. One argument which the military uses to counter such pressures is to point out that following the last campaign 4 years ago, Protective Edge, several nations pledged to help reconstruct Gaza, the civilian infrastructure there. None of them has yet to really make good on its pledges. But if there is a fourth campaign within 10 years, it is absolutely clear that no one is going to invest one penny in such a place when everybody knows that in 2 years' time, everything is going to become rubble again. So because Israel wants to help the humanitarian problem, as one of the Israeli generals says, if there is an epidemics, it knows no borders. If they hurt in Gaza, we hurt too. So up to now, cooler, calmer heads prevailed, but with the shifting winds politically, it could go the other way, much as Colonel Ben Shalom portrayed it.
Professor Inbar, what is the biggest concern right now for Israel in Gaza?
First of all, I would like to submit that fears of a humanitarian crisis are greatly exaggerated. We see shopping centers working. We see people with money there. It's true that a large part is unemployed. But basically, we should not forget that Hamas has no interest in a humanitarian crisis because this will bring to the end of their regime in Gaza. Therefore, again, in this respect too, they play brinkmanship. They want some trouble, some economic troubles because they want money, but they will not allow a real humanitarian crisis, particularly when we, in Israel, are counting the calories that enter into Gaza. I'm not sure that everybody is aware that the Israeli military is counting every day how many calories are entering into Gaza to make sure that there is no real hunger there. So this talk
But there are sewage and sanitation problems.
Yes, definitely.
And electricity only 4 hours a day. That's
They
not
can
sustainable.
survive with 4 hours a day.
survive, yes.
Yeah. And this is not our problem. We shouldn't forget that they are shooting at us, and maybe we are stupid in delivering electricity and water to people that are shooting at us, that are burning our fields. So the humanitarian crisis, I'm not sure it's as close. And Hamas is playing with it by talking about it, by making that it's going to happen a large humanitarian crisis, we basically call for more money to help the Hamas regime. I think it's totally not useful to do so, and I'm not sure that the Israeli government is trigger happy. I think one clear feature of Netanyahu is that he is not trigger happy, and he is actually stopping many of his ministers that call for action, which, by the way, many Israelis identify with, because we are fed up with what's happening there.
So, with no humanitarian crisis in sight, or at least it's on the verge of, but Israel won't allow a humanitarian crisis to happen, as you put it, do you believe that Israel has a major concern beyond the boundaries of humanitarian challenges?
Our major concern is that there is an Islamist radical organization ruling over 1 million of people that wants to destroy the Jewish state. Basically, this type of state, quasi-state, has the support of Iran. It's a proxy of Iran, that its goal is to destroy the Jewish state. This is a concern.
Colonel Ben Shalom?
I agree. And by the way, it sounded as if we disagree. We agree. It's just a matter of interpretation. And my concern is for the people of Gaza. Also issues, for instance, like the fire kites that have been wreaking havoc throughout the area. In a way, we're downplaying it, I think, because we don't want to be perceived as being brought to our knees, as I said before, but it's devastating. What they have inflicted in the south is devastating. And again, we'll find a solution to that. But there are issues like that we don't even know what the next threat is going to be. And when it materializes itself, when it blows up in our face, it will be too late. My recommendation here is to stop looking at the Israelis as far as the international community, Stop looking at the Israeli side. This is not about supporting Israel. This is not about if you're for Israel or for Hamas. Just put your attention, put your focus on the people of Gaza, their well-being, what their lives look like right now. Understand that Hamas is, to me, it's like a financial conglomerate. They personally, the leadership, by the way, have very rich bank accounts. They fly in private jets. They have no problem, okay? And all the millions from across the world that are funneled into the Gaza Strip are diverted. All these resources are diverted to terror. I think this is the main attention of the international community. If this would have been the focus, maybe it not would have been solved, but it would have been sustained.
Mr. Oren?
The Israeli government, prodded by the military and by the former coordinator of government activities in the territories, General Poli Mordechai, has come up with the idea of reconstruction in return for disarmament. The Israelis, along with the Egyptians and, of course, donors from throughout the world, will help Gaza reconstruct in return for the Hamas arsenal to be broken down. This did not prove to be workable, and for the last 3 or 4 years, Israel has perfected its defensive capabilities to such an extent. The underground obstacle was mentioned, as was some technological know-how regarding the pinpointing of tunnels as they are being built. This is in addition to the obstacle, as well as Iron Dome, of course, against the rockets, so that Israel feels quite secure in not insisting on disarmament, but on freezing what they have already, not asking them to give up what they have because they are not going to do it, but not adding to it. You may call it grease for freeze. We will grease their economy and their well-being. We will let them build an artificial harbor not far from the coast of Gaza, or find some other device. And perhaps this can be worked out along with some longer term, not long term, but longer term armistice. But in order for that to happen, the tension must come down.
Professor Inbar?
I oppose building any harbor for them anywhere. If they want to move things, Ashdod, the Israeli port, is very close to them. From what I understand from our security services, it's very difficult to monitor what's going through a port. And I have no faith in Hamas leadership not continuing to smuggle weapons and missiles, and we may end up with a Lebanese scenario, basically with 100,000 missiles there which are difficult to deal with. And there is no need for harbors, there is no need for an airport. It all can go via Israel or via Egypt, which is very close.
Colonel Ben Shalom, to what degree is Israel interested in solving or bringing about a new shift in the reality that would maybe cause Hamas to think twice about targeting Israel or losing what it has? Of course, there are different schools of thought on this matter. To what degree, however, do you think that Hamas can be brought to a point in which it wouldn't deliberately fire rockets towards Israel?
Probably impossible. Because using this kind of Western mentality that we have of talking about the seaport and stability, all that is not their language, it's not their thought, it's not their goal. I don't think they want a port. And when they say that their goal is to raise the siege over Gaza, I don't believe that that's what they want. All they want is to continue to raise the flag of so-called resistance against the brutal Israeli occupation. That means the worse it gets, the better for them. Of course, this issue of a very carefully calculated line, that understanding that if they cross that line, they lose everything. I believe that that line is very far. That means right now, the worse it gets, the better for them. The more people dead, the better for them. The last clashes on the border this was perpetrated or at least hijacked and then led by Hamas, I think they failed miserably because they lost so little people. Because we were very, very reserved, very calculated, very extreme rules of engagement. They wanted 1,000 people dead. So I think this is a deadlock as far as this kind of calculation.
Well, we're drawing near to the end of the program, so I'd like to give each and every one of you one closing sentence. Professor Inbar, we'll start with you.
I think the only way to restore some temporary deterrence is by targeted killing. Basically, to make clear to the leaders that they will pay a personal price for provoking Israel, and this may bring some kind of moderation. All other ways are totally not practical because they don't care about the welfare of their people.
Mr. Oren?
The political dimension of the split between Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank has been swept under the rug for the time being because there is no political process between Israel and Mahmoud Abbas. But there will come a day when the Trump peace deal is on the table, when the question will be asked again, who speaks for the Palestinian? And at that time, there must be some reconciliation between the two sides, two halves of Palestine.
Colonel Ben
I
Shalom?
still believe the key is a forced demilitarization from outside, not by Israel.
Well, this is all the time that we have for today, so I'd like to thank Professor Inbar, Mr. Oren, and Colonel Ben Shalom for being here today. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time. TV7 Israel's mission is to give you, our viewers, truthful information, which in effect will give you a chance to really understand what is happening in Israel and its region. If you're blessed by our programs and believe our mission to be important, we urge you to support us and become a voice for Israel. You can support us by going to our website at tv7israelnews.com. This program was made possible through your donations.